Now, what's extraordinarily impressive about this is, especially if you read it carefully, is you have both men and women working. You have both clergy and laity working. You have groups from different towns. You have groups from different classes, ruling class as well as working class. You have groups from different trades. You have goldsmiths and merchants and perfumers. So what you actually have is representatives from virtually every single part of society. And you notice what was the one thing you heard me say more than anything else? It was actually probably next to him, right next to him. Now, what do we learn? Here's what we learn. Most scholars, both liberal and evangelical, have noticed that this is part of a march, part of progression in the Bible, very important to see this, from a situation in which you have people who are, how do I say it? You have David and you have Moses. You have these major figures who are essentially operating without much cooperation from the people at all. I mean, in some ways, if you read the story of Moses, it feels that he is just carrying that whole group of people on his own back. Time after time after time, they are completely sinning. They're doing this and they're doing that. God's saying, stand aside, Moses. I am going to take them out. And Moses puts himself in the way. No, take out me, or don't do that, or what will people say? This is different. Scholars see something going on here. This is something that the clergy couldn't do by themselves. The clergy are right next to everybody else. The clergy are in there working with everybody else, but everybody's doing it. Everyone's doing it. And what you see is a movement away from just one or two big leaders who are doing, in a sense, all the ministry. And you actually see that the ministry that is rebuilding the people of God must be done by the whole people of God. Everybody's got to do it. Now, what this simply means is pretty simple. It's pointing toward the fact, and it's actually hinted at here, that there is a progression in the history of redemption when it comes to holiness. You may have heard me say that the priest dedicated the wall. That word is the Hebrew word kadosh, which means they pronounced it holy. Now, what you have in the Bible, in the history of redemption, is this kind of progression. In the earliest part, sometimes God comes down, like at Bethel. He comes down and he meets Jacob, and Jacob sees the stairway. And when the vision is over, he says, this is the house of God. But it is and it isn't. God appeared there. His holy presence was there, but it's gone. It comes down and it's there, even though he called it Bethel, meaning the house of God. It wasn't actually the house of God. It was not a place where God's presence was in a sustained way. It came down and there it was. So in the earliest part of the Bible, you see God's holiness sometimes coming down, but then it's gone. Then you have the tabernacle and the temple. And now God's holiness dwells in a place. It dwells in the Holy of Holies. The Shekinah glory is over, the glory cloud is over the Ark of the Covenant. And now what we have is we actually have God's actual presence, in a sense, in a fixed way right here in the midst of his people. But things change as time goes on. In the book of Isaiah chapter 4, there's a fascinating prophecy about the future. It says, in that day, the branch of the Lord will be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land will be the pride and glory of the survivors of Israel. Now listen to this. And those who are left in Zion, who remain in Jerusalem, will be called holy. All who are recorded among the living in Jerusalem, the Lord will wash away the filth of the women of Zion. He will cleanse the bloodstains from Jerusalem by a spirit of judgment and a spirit of fire. And then the Lord will create over all of Mount Zion and over all those who assemble around it a cloud of smoke by day and a glow of flaming fire by night. Over all the glory will be a canopy, and it will be a shelter and shade from the heat of the day and a refuge and a hiding place from the storm and the rain. That's a shock. Here we're told about a time in which instead of people living near a temple, and in the midst of the temple there's the holiness of God, It's looking forward to a day in which all the people are holy and the Shekinah glory cloud is over all of them. It's almost like the glory of God is dwelling in a group of people, not just in a building. The climax of the book of Zechariah says this. This is at the end of the book of Zechariah. On that day, on that future day, holy to the Lord will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, and the cooking pots in the Lord's house will be like the sacred bowls in front of the altar. Every pot in Jerusalem and Judah will be holy to the Lord Almighty, and all who come to sacrifice and take some of the pots and cook in them, and on that day there will no longer be a Canaanite in the house of the Lord Almighty. What? What that is, see, in the tabernacle and the temple, if a pot or some utensil was being used only for the Lord's work, it was inscribed, holy to the Lord, and it was put in the tabernacle or the temple, and it was only used for the sacrifices, it was only used for the Lord's work. On that day, even on the bridles on your horses, even the pots in your kitchen will say holy to the Lord. What is that saying? Again, it's saying someday I'm going to turn the people into a living temple. Someday the holiness of God the glory of God will break out of the building, as it were, and all the people will be holy. And the whole city will be holy. And everyone in it will be holy. In fact, every race in the city will be holy. It won't just be for ethnic Jews. There will not be a Canaanite. It won't be called Canaanites anymore. Isaiah talks about someday God will be saying, Assyria my people, and Egypt my inheritance. What is this looking toward? Here, most scholars believe, even here in the book of Nehemiah, when they call not just the tabernacle or the temple, holy, but the very building, what we really see is the whole people of God doing the ministry and the whole city being holy. It's pointing in this direction. It's pointing in the direction that we come to when Jesus Christ died on the cross. The veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom. And in Ephesians 2 and in 1 Peter 2, it says, we now are living stones in a temple. We're built together into a living temple. We have the Holy Spirit in us. The very thing that was once in the tabernacle is somehow in us. The thing that Moses said, Lord, show me your glory. And God says, no, it would destroy you. And yet in John chapter 1, it says, the Word became flesh and dwelled among us, tabernacled among us, and we beheld his glory. Glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. 2 Corinthians 3:18 talks about us beholding the glory of God, I think in the gospel, in the face of Jesus Christ. Now, what does this mean? I don't know quite what was actually happening, literally, in Nehemiah's day. All we know is Nehemiah is, in a sense, pointing toward the future, in which we're all priests, in which we're all prophets, all priests, all kings. We all have the Holy Spirit.